and candles and what have you that you want. Certainly by 1900, almost anything you could want is available in a store. So it talks about American industrial development. It also speaks volumes on industrialization society and the growth of one of America's oldest manufacturers. Fairbanks is now in the international market. This is a company that's not only still around, but clearly values its history. Their website is full of their history and their story, going
1930s.
Yeah, going well back to the 30s and where that comes from. And it's, I mean, one of the few anymore large concerns like that still around and now in an international market. And then we have our 1910 military footlocker. It's marked for the 77th Field Artillery. Washington, D.C. is the best locality we can figure. It was delivered to Washington. That's kind of the best that we've been able to track down for it. What is it? It was contracted to James S. Topham November 11, 1910. So you're talking about a military contractor. You're not talking about a depot itself doing this. The contractor, shipping, methods, military life, it alludes to all of those things. And in something that seems fairly rare to find one any longer, I mean, these are footlockers. They took a beating, as it was. But what is it talking about? It talks about those private contractors, and it's the same story whether it's private contractors in the 1860s or private contractors in 1910. It's, you know, the methods may be different, but the results are very similar. Shipping. I mean, this is the best mode of shipping, right? Put it in a footlocker, put it in any sort of steamer trunk, and that's all it is a reworked steamer trunk. Methods, military life. I mean, that. Here is a nation in 1910 that's fully gearing up for World War I and getting a move on. And what are you going to do? Well, we're making our move. You know, you've got a pre-war military there. So what does it tell us? In and of itself, the piece tells us the unit ID, and it would be impossible to try to figure out who this is. So what does the unit ID lead to? Things like being able to understand who the individual is, the wartime production, the ramifications of that production on the civilian economic market, and all the things that tie into it. And then we have our 1912 Singer sewing machine. It is a Singer with attached Bakelite light and foot pedal. The fun part about that is those are not original components to it. They are real Singer components, so somebody's taken the time and effort to actually bolt these things on. And they fit right into the attachment points should you have wanted to convert these things, should you have wanted to update them. The attachment points were already there. It is 1912 as ID'd by the model number. What does it say? It talks about the proliferation of household use of sewing machines. Maybe these are something that sewing machines started appearing in the mid-19th century. So now you're talking about something that, because it's finally caught on in home textile production, sitting there and doing everything by hand isn't as practical. When you have a machine to do it, now you have it. It's within the reach of the average consumer. So what does it tell us? Again, the transition from hand sewing garments to machine sewing, and machine sewing in household. Again, another reach of the Industrial Revolution. And then we have our naval officers' items in the 1930s. And it's a dress hat, epaulets, and sword belonging to Lieutenant Robert Carson Brownlee, and it's shipped from the Arizona to the Army Hospital in Boulder, Colorado. Fun part about this is by the 1930s, this is the transition when you're starting to get away from the old military designs. And certainly, looking at his epaulets and his hats, these are things that should have gone the way of the dodo quite a while ago. But yet, the tradition, the naval tradition, holds these things, continues to hold them on. So it's purchased in 1929 at the midshipman store of the United States Naval Academy. Why? The 30s marked an end to the naval dress items as seen above. So what does it tell us? Well, it tells us about the location of purchase. It talks about the materials and construction. You look at the way it's done. These are traditionally set items. And stylistically, they're not that much different from those of the decades prior to them. So it talks about the relationship to tradition in the earlier Navy and the evolution and progression. Obviously, if we're still using items that were fairly common decades earlier, and styles that were common decades earlier, I mean, it's still a spoon and reed belt plate, you're talking about something that doesn't advance as fast as other methods. And then our final example is... Oh, you want to get it? It's easier to explain it if you see it. Well, You want to describe it a different way then?
Well, what did you call it?
I call it a spoon and reef. He obviously doesn't like that.
Well, no, this one is not a true spoon and reef.
It's just that people are unfamiliar with the term.
Right. A true spoon and reef belt plate is a two-piece belt buckle. And it's called a spoon and reef because you can see on the design here, there's a large reef on the exterior, and then there's this dome in the middle. So you have the reef and the central part we call a spoon. And the way these would work is you stick the spoon part on its side through that reef and then turn it and it would lock into place. This is sort of just this has become just decorative on this. There's actually a hook and eye on the back there, but it still retains the shape of your spoon and reef belt plates that go back to the early 1800s. So yeah, this is the sword belt that the naval officer would have worn, and it's very traditional. Again, this is the style is basically unchanged from the early mid-1800s.
So a real spoon.
A real spoon and reef, you twisted to
Yeah,
do it.
this round dome part, if I went to take it apart, it would
Yeah,
pop
the
out.
dome pops out.
See that.
This is kind of one of the stylistic spoon and reef.
But that's what it kind of attests to, that things have changed somewhat
Yeah.
over the 100 years or so since these type of belts were first introduced. But once World War II rolled about, things changed a lot faster.
Well, my uncle was an admiral stage in China in the early 1930s.
Oh, and that was it?
Yeah.
Interesting.
The family playboy on that side.
And last, but probably thankfully least,
Oh.
is the reproduction of the HMV phonograph. And it's reproduced, it was actually reproduced by a company in San Francisco by the name of Zocalo in the early 2000s. I mean, this is by no means an antique and probably shouldn't be sitting in here. But the amazing part about this is they have done such a wonderful job that if we didn't say it on the tag, it would clearly fool people. It's got Swiss workings inside of it, and they have gone to great lengths to see the details right on these.
Really good rock.
Yes, like a very good rock.
It honors the stuff by
reproducing it appropriately. Of course,
Artist copycat.
you look at it and what they've done is they've actually altered the HMV logo so it's not, it's a reproduction. But you gotta kind of wonder, what does this say about us? And it kind of goes back to everything we've looked at this evening is what does it say about the people that play with it, the people that commission these things or use it or design it or think of it. Well, what does this say about us and what are we trying to recapture? We're just going to sit here and start cranking out reproductions of these things because we can't afford to make the real thing anymore. We don't have the time to appreciate or we don't have the talents to actually redo these. Then we just end up making interesting reproductions of them. And these items are no longer really necessarily available. I mean, they're still out there, but do you want to treat them that way? Do you want to actually crank one of these things regularly? I mean, there are people that would argue and say that's the only way to keep them running. But what does it say? So all in all, when you look at everything and everything we've looked at this evening, it has a spot that it fits in. And I think we can all, my favorite argument is that we're not very far from any of these people. And you look at whether it's clothing styles or music in the parlor entertainments or even a reproduction of his master's voice phonograph, are we really that far from them? And when we look at these things, how do we look at them? Do we look at them with that 21st century eye of, oh my, that is scandalous? Or do we look at it in its appropriate context and remembering that when you do look at period items, unless you put them, whether it's period items as something physical or it's primary source accounts or it's what have you, you have to put them into their context in order to understand them. So that's what we have for this evening.
Oh,
Thank you for being here.
Very good.